In the mid-1990s, this little bastard got dragged along to Macro by his dad, so that said dad could look at PCs for his new business. This would start off a chain of events spanning across multiple decades, and here we are now. Hello everyone, I'm High Treason, and today we're going to have a look at a PC I said we'd take a look at for a while, and it's sort of a bit like the Cyrix, I suppose, that it doesn't really do anything too fancy, but it does have a purpose, and it does have certain aspects that make it a little less usual than you'd normally see among your old PCs. Nothing that stand out, but well, we'll get there. It is a replica, it's not the original, and it's as close as I can get to the first PC I remember really sitting and using. So I guess we'd better get on with that, and if I've got anything else to say, then I'll do that somewhere else in the video, probably towards the end. I would think it's usually how it goes, isn't it? Well, first things first, this thing is not 100% accurate. The original computer was housed in the tower version of the case, as is used by my K5 now, so these might swap chassis at some point. They also might not, but no matter. I don't remember the original having the turbo display, being a version halfway between this chassis and the one my U5 lives in, which will be relevant later on. In any case, pun only intended in hindsight, we have pretty normal things going on. Buttons, a floppy drive that doesn't work, and, miraculously, a Sony drive that does, and it's been tampered with. As noted before, there's a turbo display that I've not set up. I usually set these 3-digit types to show 50 and 100. All in all, it's a pretty garish chassis, I suppose, and around its side it takes the home appliance approach of having screws there. The threads for these seem to be blown out, or else they were meant to take an M4. I'll just tap a bigger thread in there or something eventually, it doesn't really matter. The back has a plastic cover for whatever reason, maybe they were coming out in sympathy with Packard Bell garbage. Has a standard AT power supply with that switch monitor power provision that I sorely miss. In a sensible world where these things were designed by people who actually used them and worked with them, this sort of feature would have improved rather than being removed. Dumbass phone kids. I mean, just think, this thing could be software switchable. As it is, this one's providing a nice overwinter spot for a spider, so I can't use it anyway until the spider's gone. Predictably, this machine takes an AT keyboard, though less predictably, it did need some repairs to be done. We've got serial. There's also a hole because I'm a cheapskate and stole the shield from a dead video card. We've got parallel. We've got VGA. We've got Ethernet, which the original machine didn't have. We've got a familiar looking sound card. You probably know what that is already. Oddly, the top of the case has the same beaded indentation as the sides, but at least it's painted instead of being those rubberized dart magnets you see on newer machines like my stupid Cosmos. I hate this thing. Notice mine no longer has the rubber. If you want real fun, put mugs of sugary drinks on top of there and see what sort of mess that makes. I don't do that because there's holes in the top of the chassis, but I've seen other people do it and it looks disgusting. And yet people have a go at me for having grimy nails or not painting the walls. I think in reality those people should be more concerned. They've probably got ants in their house. Imagine the ants. Only the side screws have to be taken out, the back ones you can leave alone. Though for such a tacky looking thing it is surprisingly solid. I've long thought several factories were making both this desktop and the tower chassis with their own little alterations, probably to save costs. Unfortunately some of the threads do seem to be stripped out, but whatever. It may be that they were tapped for M4s now that I look at it, and well, I'll try some of those, and if not I can just tap them for a slightly larger thread than they originally meant for. There's enough metal there to do it, should work. It probably is worth noting that this chassis uses the less common double-ended standoffs, which are actually easier to find today than the keyhole type that most chassis were using. My K5 chassis uses a variant of these too, and curiously, I can get them locally. I'm not a huge fan of them as they tend to flex around a lot, and some cases that use these do a really shitty job of holding the motherboard in place. I've never seen them break though, which is surprising because they always feel like they're going to. They do stick out the bottom of this chassis, so be aware of that if you're pushing it around on an uneven surface. Then you might bend them or possibly snap them. Well, what do we have here? It took me years to identify the motherboard, and I'm still not 100% positive on this, but it's by far the closest match to what I remember, and it's not like a single fuzzy memory of the internals from before I knew very much about computers is going to be entirely faultless. I'm fairly confident it's right, though. We'll see it closer in just a moment, but let's start with this little thing. The Cerny drives were, being Cerny, not the most reliable or long-lived things, and started dropping like flies in short order. As such, where the original model was interfaced to a card somewhere in the machine, I can't get one of those and wouldn't be willing to pay the money if one did come up, so ours is IDE. This later model has a different LED behaviour, so my crappy little board here simply blinks the LED like the older model drive. That's all it does. The bezel is 99% the same, so you generally can't tell aside from the drive being marginally faster unless you're really looking for it. Of course, it's Cerny shit, and they're basically the Apple of Japan, so it'll probably break irreparably soon, assuming it hasn't already during the filming of this. The drive in the original computer was replaced with an IDE Mitsumi after only a few months. I guess those turned out to be the better drive in the long run, even though they look like cheap tats. I was given the original drive to play with, but, well, it was the 90s. I don't have that anymore. It was broken anyway, and, well, I did learn some things about electronics from poking around in there, so I guess it went to a good use. For graphics, the machine has an S3 Trio 64 with 2 megs of RAM on it. The original ran an ATI card, and I think it was a Mac 32 PCI, which is probably quite expensive now. I might install a Mac 64 in here eventually, but to all intents and purposes, it won't make a difference. Seriously, they're both pretty typical 2D accelerator cards when they're running in Windows. If you care about benchmarks, the S3 will have the edge in DOS Visa modes. As it is, I didn't build this machine for performance, so I'm not really concerned by this, and in the real world that gap's going to be quite small, because you're probably going to run into some other wall like the speed of the RAM or accessing the sound card that'll hold your game up long before the frame buffer on either card can have much of an impact. Now you might be there thinking, well, how can the sound card affect it? And well, it's not necessarily the sound card itself so much as the audio driver that the game uses. If, for example, you're getting poor frame rates in Duke Nukem 3D, try switching from 16-bit mixing to 8-bit mixing, and the frame rate of the game might actually double. This is in fact a limiting factor on a few of my machines. It's always worth trying these things. You get a feel for it when you've worked on enough PCs, you can usually guess. Ethernet. It's real tech. You'll never see another 3Com on this channel, in all likelihood. Fuck those things, I've had enough of them breaking. Sound Blaster 16 then. Who would have guessed? It does have the Sony interface on it, though it's obviously unused. There's really nothing special about it. It's a Sound Blaster 16. It's a variant of the 1740, it's a 1790. So at least it's less crappy than those 2.2 whatever versions people like to peddle for some reason. No ASP chip on this sound card. Not that anyone really cares about that piece of junk. Well, I assume somebody does, but, I mean, it's not like it really that much uses it, and probably nothing I'd want to run, and I very much doubt the original PC had one. Obviously it has a real FM chip for those that care. It sounds like farts regardless, and, well, you know, there is a thought about FM synthesis that I really should have put in the video about that useless VZ1, and that is that when you think back to the time that the Adlib came out, it was around 1987, and that thing was under $300, and I did a video about the Adlib. You might remember I did a video about clones of it, and how Adlib Inc. refused to lower their price very much, so it ended up being overpriced, but the Adlib was posited as affordable consumer-grade hardware, and it pretty much was. You know, well, that's hundreds of dollars, and yeah, but how much would it have cost you to get anything better in a PC? You know, what would it have cost you to get a CD drive in the 80s to do Redbook audio? Those things cost hundreds of dollars. What would it have cost you to put, like, sample-based audio in there? A lot more. So that was designed to be relatively cheap, comparatively cheap. It did its job, it had a purpose, and it was pretty damn good at what it did. It wasn't necessarily the best sounding thing, but it did its job as well as it needed to. Now, the big FM keyboards like the VZ1 and the DX7 II, which came out a little later than the Adlib, all cost upwards of $1,000 and really sound much the same, so a bit of a rip-off. And that's another one of my problems with that. The Adlib gets a pass. You'll notice I don't really bash on it too much. I say it doesn't sound good, but I don't really criticise the idea of having the YM3812 or the 262 in a PC, because it had a reason and a purpose. It was doing good things, even if it didn't sound particularly good. The big synthesizers are just a con. They're a rip-off, and nobody in their right mind would ever have thought it was a good idea. I don't really understand where people are coming from with things on there, but, well, that's that. We'll go back to talking about the PC now, and that jerk on the microphone, I'm sure, will continue to be just as boring as he always is. As it happens, the original system had its sound card replaced at the same time as the CD-ROM drive. I don't remember which model it was substituted with, only that it wasn't Sound Blaster 16 compatible, or, for that matter, compatible with very much at all. I'm not sure why they felt the need to change it. Possibly it was just an attempt to scam my father, who, as much as he'd like to think he was, has never been the most computer literate. Not that he's terrible, but, yeah, good luck telling him anything other than what he thinks as far as this sort of thing's concerned. I told you there were no special cards in this thing. The RAM was increased to 64 meg in this, because it's what I had, and I'm not likely to use it anywhere else, so it might as well do something useful. The original machine had far less than this, although still no slouch for its time. I actually think it was 16 megs. My dad really didn't skimp on the original machine at all. He probably wanted to show off to anyone who walked into his business. That said, the price of the remaining Socket 4 stock did drop as the Socket 5 machines took hold, which would have been happening when this thing was new. The system can take EDR, which I believe this is, but it doesn't seem to take advantage of it, handling it like standard FPD RAM. This was pretty normal for machines in this time period. A lot of 486 boards do that. I bet a far few of these machines pissed their owners off when the expensive memory upgrades proved to be no faster. The board has onboard I/O. For a time I thought the original system had it on a card, but the cables were definitely up top, and I think my memory was wrong because of other things, so I'm quite confident this is the right board. Expansion slots, as we've seen, are typical for the era. White ISA slots, something that I definitely remember from the original machine. Cache has been increased to 512k, again, just because I had the chips to do it, and don't really have more builds to do that don't already have their own allotted set of parts. This won't really affect the operation of anything, because the chipset seems to be just a few weeks too old to support the cache interleave feature. I think a quick way to tell is if your board can take 2 megabytes, then it probably does support interleave, but if it tops out at 1 megabyte like this one, it won't, assuming you have this chipset and all the sockets available, of course. The rules will be different for others, and most people prefer Intel chipsets anyway, which maybe isn't misplaced, but I've had good luck with these SYS chipsets. I swear one day I'll find one that says PED0 instead of PED1 on that string on the bottom there. The cache on these, like many boards, can be accessed with a write-back or write-through scheme. If you're chasing performance on your PC, regardless of which platform it is, try both settings, as each scheme has its own pros and cons. Write-back, for example, seems like it should be faster, but it might cause a load of cache misses in the particular thing you're trying to run, so always worth a go. Now, the motherboard we're talking about is the ECS SI5PI. It sports the SYS500 chipset, just like my 8-bit PS5, and it's a slightly older version of the chipset in my AMD K5, which uses the SI54P motherboard. Perhaps now it's obvious why I took to those systems so quickly. Where the K5 is obviously a Socket 5 platform, this machine, like my 8-bit PS5, is a Socket 4. Indeed, I think it's probably quite unusual in that regard that I started messing with a PC on Socket 4 while most would have been on Socket 3 or 5, and probably a lot more sensible of them. This system's 60 MHz, But I think the original might have been the more costly 66 MHz chip. They probably just wanted to get rid of them that late on. Socket 4, as we know, is a little bit of an oddball. It had only 2 CPUs available for it, those being the original 5V Pentiums at 60 or 66 MHz, and the P54 based overdrive that, on a board like this, basically just turns it into a Socket 5 equivalent at 120 or 133 MHz. Long-time subscribers will remember that I made a video on that particular processor upgrade once, but for those curious, I'll link it somewhere. Probably a card, assuming we still have those in the upper corners by the time you see this. In any case, the CPU in here is a gold top, a fairly common model. It runs just as hot as any other Socket 4 gold top. And, well, they have a bad reputation, don't they, these processors? It's funny how most of Socket 4's problems go away as soon as you stop using Intel's crap motherboards. I'd sooner be stuck with Socket 4 than some Socket 8 crap at any rate. Socket 8 is genuinely abhorrent. Now, you probably noticed this motherboard does use the resin-potted, battery-backed RTC chip there, but this is an ECS board, so it's socketed. This isn't actually the chip that was stopping me using the board, and somehow the battery's still good for now. It was in fact the 40-pin dip next to it, the keyboard controller. It died. I don't know why this happened, but I suspect none of these things were really designed to last over 30 years. But being an ECS board, this is also socketed, and, well, people have bashed on ECS a fair bit over the years, and every so often say, oh, why do you use ECS as garbage? Well, this is why. This motherboard's now over 30 years old, it's still running, and the one thing that failed was in a socket, and I had a spare that I plugged in, and it now works. That's why. But over here is the part that killed the original computer, somewhat indirectly. The CMD ER640 PCI IDE interface. This chip had a design flaw that would cause the hard drive to become corrupted over time. This did get silently patched in Windows 95 versions past a point, but our machine predated that, and while it was upgraded in short order, I think the damage was already done. On this motherboard there is the option to disable this chip, but back then that's not how it played out. By 1997 the computer was still under warranty, and Atlantic, the vendor, chose to simply replace it with a new Pentium MMX 166 instead of repairing it again. As a side note, if anyone has a computer with the Atlantic case badge, which should be a purpley blue wave on a white background, please snap me a photo of it so I can try to make a replica, as I've lost my original one over the years. And if I do make a replica, I'll send you some of them. Still, that Pentium MMX used the chassis my U540 now inhabits. And now you know why I had that lying around 20 years ago when I had to make that piece of junk because I didn't have a working PC. Weird how that turned out to be one of my favourite machines, isn't it? I no longer have the motherboard from the Pentium MMX. It was a PC Chips M535, I think, but I'm sure it had a second potted chip that was smaller and more square than the usual RTC. If you have any ideas of the model, let me know, not that I'm likely to get another one. Did you know I actually hate the Pentium MMX platform? And maybe someday I'll make a video about that, because I do have a working Pentium MMX machine. I mean, there's no shortage of those in the world. The hard drive in this system is a little bit anemic. It's definitely the right type of drive and the sound is pretty much what I remember, but I'm not entirely sure the original was only 512 meg. It's certainly in the right range. It's a Seagate drive. As much as it's of no concern to me here, this drive is very slow, although it is interfaced to that CMD ER640, so it might well end up corrupted. Though if Windows 95 does indeed patch the bug, that would certainly make the speed worse, this is known, and it would explain a few things here. You could work around the problem somewhat by using the ISA IDE controller, especially say if you were going to run only DOS on this machine. Or you could use some sort of cards to hook the hard drive up instead of the onboard solution. It doesn't have to be IDE, does it? I mean, my K5's running on SCSI. As this computer isn't doing anything critical, it can corrupt the hard drive for all I care. It doesn't really make a difference. And it's not like I'm not used to that sort of thing by now, so that'd be a pretty normal day. What makes me confident that this is the right motherboard is the way things look if we start it up. This post screen is actually a slight departure from the usual, lacking any of the logos you'd normally expect. Now, this is the screen that I remember seeing, because this screen was exciting. Yeah, sure, we're all used to it now, but at the time this screen was like opening a gateway to new and unknown things, never before seen, the first step on a new adventure, an exciting journey into the beyond of who only knew what. Back then I didn't really know what a lot of it meant until I started reading books, some of which probably ruined the way I write the English language. Although what I do distinctly remember is the version string being printed in that particular way, the distinctive rhythm of the startup process, the lack of logo, and the config table that came after. Back on that machine you'd see a TSR start up for the Sony CD-ROM drive as the operating system loaded, but not here. I guess I could fake it by just printing the strings to the screen, but there'd not be much point in that. This computer runs Windows 95, although while the original got RTM, this got 95B. Outside of a few specific things, I don't imagine there's much difference to write home about, and generally as you get towards the later releases of 95, the reliability tends to improve a little bit. A lot of people do claim that 95B is hugely broken, but I can't say I've ever noticed it being any more broken than the others. Perhaps they're trying to run it on systems that are too fast, there's no risk of that here, or maybe they just don't really know how to use Windows 95 very well. It is quite an easy operating system to break if you don't know what you're doing with it, though thankfully it's quite an easy operating system to fix if you do know what you're doing with it. I really can't say. Naturally this machine will play hover. You'll be hovering around quite a while waiting for that damn disk to load the levels, and you can't really expect the best frame rates on something like this, not that it's awful. We didn't really notice any of this at the time. It may be worth remembering that I live in a country where the remaining stock of Atari 7800 systems was selling moderately well when this PC was new, and also that uptake of PCs in the home was on the slower side for the developed world. The only other PCs I'd seen up to this point were 16-bit machines at a glance in the distance. Aside from things that were available in the shop, that was in a shop for commercial stuff. You didn't really see them in houses very much yet. Of course, the machine would play all the older DOS titles everybody knows and remembers, so I don't really have to talk about those. Instead, there's a few less mentioned things that I will mention, and often they're not mentioned for good reason. But it would be this machine that ran Same Game, and Bananoid, and Quatris, and Balloons. It would later run Tonka Construction, Blinky Bill, and one I remember very well, towards the end of the machine being around, Ultimate Human Body. You notice I no longer have copies of most of these, or if I do, I just don't really want to install them. I've no desire to revisit a lot of these. There are actually some interactive, and I'm being generous by using that word here, stories from a series called Naughty Stories that I'd like to find copies of. They're not that kind of naughty. Get your mind out of the gutter. These were children's stories. It sounds worse now, doesn't it? Stuff like Tasman's Terrible Tantrums and Billy the Bothersome Bully. Come to think of it, you'd probably end up with some kind of lawsuit for giving a library of kids software the name Naughty Stories these days. I mean, everybody has the internet now, and well, you can just imagine what sort of horrifying things would happen when some poor unsuspecting child types that into a search engine, and well, come to think of it, just about everybody's illiterate today, so it's possible they might be blissfully unaware and just click away blindly until they found the software they were looking for. Oh yeah, the internet. This would have been the machine that first connected to AOL. And I still have access to the mailbox. That mailbox is like decades old. Yeah, and AOL sucked. There is, of course, one thing that we cannot neglect to mention. And so began that, the FPS game to rule them all, first the Shawa, then registered 1.3. This machine did not see the plutonium pack. Never would I have thought that one day I'd be here on the internet making occasional videos on advanced level design techniques for the game. Techniques that themselves likely far exceed anything the original developers had in mind when they implemented the underlying mechanics, nor that I'd have made my own episode for the game, unfortunately targeting Pentium 2 hardware, so it's not going to run very well on here. Of course, this was my dad's PC back then, and it was often taken away to his business premises, so there were extended periods of time where I didn't see it at all. It'd be a few years until I got my own PC, which was a 386, so a bit of a step down. But before that, this is where my journey started. On an otherwise normal day, somewhere in the early mid-90s, and for better or worse, here we are today. Yeah, where do you want to go today? Well, that seems to be that. I'm happy with this machine. It does what it's supposed to do. It does it just fine. You might notice I didn't run any benchmarks this time, and that's because I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste my time. Socket 4 performance is pretty flat. You've got Intel motherboards which perform terribly, and then you've got everything else that performs quite well. This thing, when you think about it, the hardware is much the same as my 8-bit machine, and so if we put them with the exact same configuration, they'll score within 1% of each other. So that Pentium overdrive video I noted, yeah, if you're that curious, you could go and look at that, but for this machine it doesn't matter. It would score the same if we set it up the same, but it's not the point of this thing. It's really not what it's for. And that 8-bit is the more interesting machine. This thing, you know, that has all the cool video hardware and audio hardware, and this thing has, it looks like a PC from an office supplies place, which is what it's supposed to be, so it's doing it right. You might have noticed the video card's got an issue with its memory. I'm not going to fix it, can't fix it, sod's chips, can't solder them, and I'm not spending the money on the tools. So that settles that. We'll put a Mac 64 in. That will hurt the benchmarks, and I don't care, because, as I said, this isn't it's not for performance. That's not the point of it. It's supposed to be that PC from years ago, and that's what it's doing. It's doing it fine. Now, yeah, I did a post about this, and someone's not going to have seen it and they're going to get mad at me, and you can get mad at me. I don't like this any more than you do, but I want to experiment, because I vowed to talk about this in every video I do this year, and I'm going to, because if I was anybody else on any other channel and I'd done this for half as long and done half as much at a fraction of the quality, my viewing figures and subscriber count would be a lot bigger. And the problem's not with the audience, it's not with you, and I don't think it's with me, but maybe it is. And so, you know, I personally, there's somebody screwing me over, is there something I'm not aware of? So I'm going to experiment. I want to experiment just a little bit, tamper with the way thumbnails are done, fiddle with wording for a couple of phrases in the video. I don't know if you like the idea or subscribe to such notions, things like that, you see. But it makes me wonder, will that affect how YouTube delivers it to other people? Does it make it more likely, less likely? I'm going to be completely transparent with you with this, and if we do anything else, but I hate the thumbnail I've put on this. I'm probably going to make it normal, so what I'm saying won't make any sense in the future. But I just want to fiddle with these things a little bit and just see if anything happens, and I'm going to clue you in on anything I do with this. But yeah, for the next one, I'll be back to normal. Said I'd get this done by the end of February. Looks like I'm going to, if everything works. And we'll come back with electronics next time. In the meantime, I do still have the gaming channel, if you want to see that. Old games, new games, on old PCs, except the new stuff. I guess we'll play that on a new PC. And live stream occasionally. I'll leave a link to that. But next time, on this channel, electronics. I've told you about it. I better get ordering the bits and assembling it. And it's going to be in multiple parts. We'll see the transistor logic somewhere next month. And then I don't know what we'll do between that and the relay bit, and might go to 3 parts because I might have to do all the displays and things like that in a separate video. So it might run up to 3 parts, I don't know yet. And somewhere this year I am going to probably be absent for quite a while because I'm sick of this room layout and I want to build what's essentially miniaturised warehouse racking on one side of the room, put all my desks there and everything. That's probably going to take quite a while. But we'll see. Might not. Might happen real fast when I get to that because of the things to deal with fast. Still, that's all for the future. And for now, this Pentium 60. I'm happy with it. It does its job. Don't think we'll see it on this channel again, not because there's anything wrong with it, but PS5 is just a more interesting machine, isn't it? That 8-bit's, it's way better, as is the Globalist machine, the one on that VL board. They're more interesting than this thing, and they're supposed to be. That's the point. You know, that's what this thing's all about, is just been a store-bought sort of looking thing. And I may swap the cases between it and the K5. I'm still not 100% certain on that. But in any case, I'm high treason. I think I've said all I need to say now. Obviously I could rant until the end of time, more than capable of that, several times over. Thank you ever so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, until then, don't be a screw-up. Load DOS 622 up. The music's happening. My PC crashed. Yeah, that's not supposed to happen. It's probably just down to the faulty video card. Seems to be, because I can still hear the PC running. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, this might not work, but I tried to tell it to shut down. There you go. Yo! That's how good Windows 95 is. Even after a crash, it remembers what folder I had open. Good luck finding that in modern Windows.